All right.
So it's slow though. It says press the three fingers though. Okay, I remember this from last. Alrighty. You're gonna check. All right, thanks, Kyle. All right, bye. Alrighty. Well, good morning, everyone. This is attorney Robyn McCoy, and we have attorney Eli Savit, who is a candidate for the Washtenaw County prosecutor's race. This is Robyn Legal. And so we're gonna interview Eli, and let us know if you have any questions. So Eli, I know I sat down with you early on in the race and talked with you, and now it's crunch time. You've got we're only a few weeks away. So how are things going?
Yeah. Well, and it's only a few weeks away, but really, I think this time around we don't even have an election day. We've got an election month and a half because so many people, thanks to the Promote the Vote initiative and thanks to the Secretary of State's decision to mail out absentee ballot requests to everybody, and because folks are a little bit worried about safely going to the polls on August 4th, we're seeing people vote now. So we are in the thick of voting. We're excited. We've got 120 plus interns and volunteers. We're calling voters. We're texting voters. We're putting door hangers on people's doors in a COVID-safe manner. Wearing gloves, wearing masks, and we're just doing everything possible to, in a safe and socially distanced way, get our message out to voters and have the conversations that matter in our community. And we're happy with how things are going. I think that we're at a turning point right now, and people are ready for real and systemic change in our justice system. We haven't had an open prosecutor's race in 28 years here. I don't think we've ever had a real choice for prosecutor. Historically, it's just been a choice between tough on crime candidate A and tough on crime candidate B. And I think reflective of where both our county and our country are going in terms of thinking about the criminal justice system, we've seen a really vigorous interest in this race and in how we can best move forward in our community and build a justice system we can be proud of. So we're excited. We got a little over 3 weeks to go, and we'll know on August 4th.
And can you tell the voters, what motivated you to get in this race from the outset?
Yeah, sure. So there were a couple of things, but look, for those who don't know me, I'm born and raised in Washtenaw County. Graduated from Pioneer High School, and after spending some time elsewhere practicing law and being a public school teacher, actually, I decided to come back to Washtenaw County, come back to Ann Arbor, put down roots here, and this is my community. This is where I intend to spend the rest of my life. And I saw in our criminal justice system a reflection of the inequities and the policies of mass incarceration that we've seen across the country for the past several decades. And, there was outrage, there was anger, there was pain in the community about the way that the current prosecutor's office had been overseeing things. And so I got into this race last May, actually. It seems like ages ago. 2020 seems like it's been a century, but
Right.
I got in intending to challenge Brian Mackey, who's the current prosecutor, because I thought that we needed a civil rights informed perspective in the prosecutor's office. I thought that we needed a change in leadership. We needed to have a prosecutor's office that prioritized racial equity, that prioritized socioeconomic equity, that ended the school to prison pipeline and ended the policies of mass incarceration that we've seen far too long in this country and in this county. So, just to take a step back, the way I started my campaign was not the traditional way. I didn't sit, with the current prosecutors or, the sort of law enforcement establishment, which is traditionally how you build support for this type of prosecutor's race. I started with sitting with activists in the community who were looking for a challenger to Brian Mackey, who were looking for change in the system. And we sat together and we came up with a plan for, both how we'd run a campaign and ultimately what needed to be changed in the prosecutor's office. And we put out that plan from the very start. We've been running ever since, but this is fundamentally a campaign about real and systemic change and about bringing the prosecutor's office back to serving the community rather than just imposing punishment as we've seen over the past 28 years.
Okay, and Ellie, what makes you think you're the best person for this job?
Yeah, so I can go back over my resume, but I'll start by saying this. Fundamentally, I don't think that this job is about one person. I think that it is important that whoever gets this position is somebody that is rooted in the community, has started talking to activists, to people that have been harmed by the criminal justice system here in Washtenaw County, and those are the folks that have been at my table, that have been my core team since even before I started running for this office. So I just want to put that out there. I can talk about my resume and everything like that, but I think far too often in political campaigns, it becomes a contest for who has the most accomplishments, and we talk about ourselves a lot. And I think we really need to move beyond that and talk about who's at the table and who's going to be at the table moving forward as we reform our justice system. But in terms of why me, in terms of my background, I am not a prosecutor, and I say that forthrightly. I never, when I graduated law school, I never thought that I would be running for a prosecutor. I did not want to spend my life in a system that was, in my mind, perpetuating inequity, that was, putting people behind bars for minor offenses, that was criminalizing childhood mistakes. But over the course of my career, and I've been a civil rights lawyer and a public interest lawyer and have litigated cases and represented everybody from criminal defendants to folks in immigration proceedings, victims of consumer fraud, kids trying to vindicate their right to a special education. And I've gone toe to toe with some of the biggest corporate entities in the nation. Throughout my career, I have seen the criminal justice system at the center of so much inequity and injustice in our society. Okay. And I think what we need in the prosecutor's office, quite frankly, is somebody that has experience seeing the cascading consequences of the criminal justice system from all sides. I think it's important to have somebody that has a civil rights perspective in the prosecutor's office, because far too often we see the decisions made by local prosecutors and district attorneys violating people's rights. I think it's important to have somebody that's, I've represented criminal defendants up on appeal and seen, for example, the consequences. I represented a mother of 5 who was sentenced to years upon years in prison because she rejected a plea deal for a nonviolent offense by the prosecutor and was vindictively given a sentence following trial. I think it's important to have folks who have represented people in immigration proceedings and seen the consequences of the criminal justice system on members of our immigrant community. I represented a client who, because of a conviction obtained in the 1980s, was going to be sent back to Hungary, a country that he came from when he was 4 years old. He was in his 60s. Right. And his conviction was decades in the past. He'd been out of prison, out of trouble for decades. And because of that conviction, the federal government was going to send him back to a country that he did not know at all. He came here when he was 4. I think that's important perspective to have. I think, if we are serious about eliminating the school to prison pipeline, we should want people in prosecutors' office who have represented kids, who have stood with kids with disabilities. Far too frequently, kids with disabilities are criminalized.
Right.
And that,
no,
and those, I know, and you do great work on this, right? And standing for kids and trying to vindicate their right to an education rather than criminalizing them. That's important to experience, an important perspective to have. And quite frankly, I think if we're serious about eliminating the school to prison pipeline, we should be looking for prosecutors. And not every race is going to present this, but I think it's important that I was a classroom teacher.
Right. No, I did. And looking at your background, you have a very impressive background. Of you were a special ed teacher. You clerked for
Yep.
for judges, federal judges on the Supreme Court. You're a professor at University of Michigan Law School, and you're currently the senior legal counsel for the city of Detroit. So you definitely have a very impressive background. What do you say to those people who, they want criminal justice reform, but they also look at the role of the prosecutor as making, like, one of the first things being ensuring the safety of the public from harm? And so how do you intend to balance the goal of ensuring the safety of the public, but also making sure that the rights of the defendants are not violated?
It's a great question, and but I think, quite frankly, it's a false choice. I don't think that reform and safety are at odds with each other, and I think the numbers bear this out. Right? If you look here in Washtenaw County, the metrics vary year to year, but we have close to a 70% recidivism rate most years in Washtenaw County. Right? Which means 70% of the time, people are going through the justice system. They're having punishment imposed on them, and they're coming right back in through the justice system. That's a result of our failure to treat the root cause of crime, right? Somebody comes in, they're dealing with mental health issues, with addiction issues, with trauma, right? That's an opportunity, a lot of the times, to course correct, to provide somebody resources, to provide them help, rather than cycling them into jail and prison over and over again. And it's true in particular because often you see, folks coming into the criminal justice system, and it's relatively rare that the first time they come through that they've committed a really serious offense, the kind that people are concerned about, right? It happens,
right.
But it's rare that the first time you're coming through the justice system, you committed a murder, right?
Right.
And so my view is, if we can nudge people off that path and take a more rehabilitative approach at the outset, we're keeping us safer. That means that those crimes are not going to be committed in the first place. If we're talking about imposing harsh sentences on people for violent offenses and sexual assaults and things like that, which, to be clear, those are people that I do think need to be separated from the community. But the focus there is really too late, because that's already happening after there's been a crime, after there's been a victim, after people have been hurt. A better system, in my view, means that the first time somebody comes through the criminal justice system, when they're dealing with these health issues, addiction, mental health, trauma, when they're a kid and their brains are still developing, and this is particularly important, right, it's an opportunity to course correct. It's an opportunity to deflect them out of the justice system. With kids in particular, you connect them with mentors, you connect them with resources, you address that underlying cause of what brought them into the criminal justice system. And then we're not going to have those crimes that everybody's scared of, rightfully so, on the back end, and there won't be those victims. And this isn't just my view. If you look at the research, and especially for young people, sending a young person, a teenager, an adolescent, to a juvenile detention facility makes it significantly more likely that they're going to commit crimes in the future.
Right. No, I mean, I think I know that's part of why I worked at the juvenile court in Detroit, and that's part of why I phased over from just doing the delinquency to doing more educational advocacy and doing work in the community, trying to help make sure that the kids had the right supports. So what's your position on restorative justice, and what does that look like if you become prosecutor in your office?
Yeah, so I'm glad you asked, and because restorative justice, it's a phrase that sounds really good, and people use it a lot, but they use it inexactly a lot of times. It has a very precise meaning. And what restorative justice is, it's a process by which, at the survivor's choice, right? It's always at the survivor of an act's choice, but the survivor and the person who committed harm, after a period of intense preparation by professionals, they actually sit down together. And the person who committed harm has to acknowledge the harm that they've done, has to accept responsibility. And then the survivor and the person who committed harm together work out a way that amends can be made, right, in an individualized way. Now, I'm I'm a big believer in restorative justice, and I'll note that I've been endorsed not just by some of our leading proponents for restorative justice here locally, like the Reverend Joe Summers, but also by Restorative Justice International, which is a leading umbrella organization of over 6,000 restorative justice practitioners and groups nationwide. And the reason I am a fan of restorative justice, and I want to dramatically expand its use, is because we know that it's worked elsewhere, and it is survivor-centric. The best work being done in restorative justice national is being done by a woman named Danielle Sered out in New York, in the Bronx and Brooklyn, through an organization called Common Justice. And what they do is they use restorative justice as an alternative to our adversarial justice system for a whole array of crimes. But here's the key point, Robyn. If you remember at the beginning when I said, it's always at the survivor's choice. When given a choice about whether to engage in restorative justice or whether to go through the traditional criminal justice system, 90%, and that's the real number, you can look it up, because it floored me at first too, 90% of survivors opt for restorative justice.
Right.
Now, what does that tell us about our criminal justice system as it's currently constituted? We always hear from prosecutors that, taking a tough on crime approach is about standing for the victim. But when actually given a choice as human beings about what they want to have happen, 90% of victims, 90% of survivors opt for restorative justice instead of the traditional adversarial justice system. And I know, Robyn, you're interviewing other lawyers, so I'm going to go on and on. But I just do want to pause about why that is. If you think about what our current justice system sets up for a victim of a crime, it's not individualized. It's a sort of one-size-fits-all approach, right? The justice system says, well, something bad happened to you, and so if everything goes well in the trial, in the judicial process, what's going to come out of that is something bad is going to happen to another person. They're going to go to prison. They're going to go to jail, right? They're going to have consequences imposed on them. But there's no real recompense. I mean, you can get restitution, but there's no real recompense in an individualized way for the survivor.
Right. No, I've seen that. I've been practicing 18 years. And I think that's part of why I decided to switch over to educational advocacy. And what I was seeing with some of the Detroit public schools, when we go in there, some of the schools were doing, we actually did restorative circles, and where you had the victim and the person who, harmed the other person sit down together in a safe space and have a dialogue about what was going on. And we really worked to have a healing between the two parties. And the traditional criminal justice system doesn't do that. I know, especially with the adults, I've not seen that. So I definitely think restorative justice is the way to go. You were going to say something else about restorative justice, or?
Well, yeah, and I mean, the other thing, and you mentioned this, it's about the healing. And if you think about what the traditional criminal justice system, and we have an adversarial justice system in this country because it's the one that we inherited from, England 500 years ago, right? But if you think about that, the person who committed harm is disincentivized from ever taking responsibility and acknowledging the harm that they did to you. Because the minute they do that, they're pleading guilty, right? They say, I did it. They say, yeah, I did it. I acknowledge the harm that's done. And for a survivor, often what they want is the person who harmed them to acknowledge it, to internalize it, and just not to do it again, right? But our traditional system actually disincentivizes that, and so it doesn't promote real healing. It doesn't promote the acceptance of responsibility, which is why restorative justice is not only something that survivors prefer. When it's done right, it actually significantly reduces recidivism rates, because the person that committed harm has now internalized the harm they've done. They see the damage that they've caused in a real personal way, and that's in many ways a lot more powerful to preventing future crime than just meting out punishment through a one-size-fits-all approach.
Right, and so. I know you've been following the headlines. I've seen you've been going into being active with some of the protests. And what are your thoughts? We've seen what happened on with George Floyd. What are your thoughts on police justice reform? I know that there's some local legislation and there's some national legislation. So what is your position on police reform?
Police reform is just long overdue. I mean, this is we've seen, and I will say, I hope this is my hopeful side coming out, but this time does feel different. The sustained energy around the protests and the movement for change. But over the last, 5-10 years, we've seen countless videos of Black men and women being murdered by the police. And this isn't a new phenomenon, right? The only thing that's changed is now everybody's got a camera in their pocket, right? So this has been going on for decades, and a lot of times it's been swept under the rug because you didn't have the incontrovertible video evidence, right?
That's true.
And the victim is dead, and people believe the cops. Right.
That's what I 18 years I've been a criminal defense attorney, and usually my clients will say, well, we look at the report, they're like, that's not what happened. But if it's their word against the police, a lot of times jurors would just favor the police. But now we do have, I'm a spiritual person, so in scripture it said what's done in the dark will come to light. So now you do have video technology to show what really happened, but still you have situations where some jurors, it's black and white, and sometimes they will side with the police. And so,
sure.
So what, I know that there's different discussions about what police justice reform looks like. There's discussions about getting rid of qualified immunity, getting rid of the chokehold. And what is your position on those two items?
Oh, well, that should be low hanging fruit. I mean, getting rid of the chokehold. How many people have to die before we get rid of this? It's not a necessary tactic to ensuring public safety, and it kills people. Absolutely, we should be getting rid of the chokehold. That should have happened after Eric Garner was murdered on camera, right? And I will note that, in fact, the chokehold had been banned by the New York Police Department before Eric Garner was murdered, right? And yet the officer that killed him still wasn't charged, which just demonstrates how deep the rot is in the system in a lot of places. Qualified immunity, this as a lawyer, but I'll just explain it a little bit for if there's non-legal folks that are listening. Qualified immunity is a made-up judicial doctrine, right? Which it's really, it's made up. And what it provides in the way that it's been interpreted by the courts is that police are immune from civil rights lawsuits or lawsuits that seek to vindicate rights given under the Constitution for virtually any sort of action unless there's been a binding precedent court case where the facts exactly mirror what that officer did. And so, by way of example, and I'm taking this from a real case that I saw, right? But by way of example, there could have been a case in which a 5-year-old was handcuffed, right, at a school and was, the subject of excessive force, and the officer, the court said, okay, yeah, that violates the Constitution. But in the next case, if it's a 7-year-old, right, which is still a tiny kid, and anybody should know that you shouldn't be using handcuffs, you shouldn't be using excessive force on a child, right? The court will say, oh, well, how is the officer to know? That case was a 5-year-old, this is a 7-year-old, it's different. And you see this too, it's not just with respect to police, but you see it especially in response to lawsuits in prisons too. And some of the conditions that are being imposed on people in prisons are just absolutely abhorrent. There's a case right now that I was just reading about the other day where a prisoner was forced to lie in a pool of their own feces and waste, and isolated for days upon days at a time. And anybody in their right mind would look at that and say, that's cruel and unusual punishment, right? That's a violation of the 8th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. But they're litigating that case, and they're saying, oh, we need breathing room to be able to make mistakes. We need immunity, and we can't be subject to civil suit because we need this breathing room. Well, no. If the violation is clear on its face like that, it shouldn't matter that there hasn't been a case directly on point with those exact precise facts. we need to hold officers, we need to hold government officials accountable for when they violate our rights. Qualified immunity prevents that from happening. And because, when you sue an officer, when you sue a member of government, really at the end of the day, usually the government entity is paying for the judgment of the lawsuit, right?
Right.
What qualified immunity does, that disincentivizes people that are training police, people that are, training prison guards, etc., from making sure that they are being trained in a rights protective way, because they got no financial incentive to do it. If they did, then you'd see a lot less force, a lot less of this brutality, both on the streets and in jails and in prisons. So there's no basis for qualified immunity in the law or in the Constitution. Really, it can and should be changed by an act of Congress. It can be changed at state level too if you're talking about violations of state rights, and it's long overdue.
Right. I mean, I know when you talk about the conditions, like those of us that have been criminal defense attorneys, we're looking at COVID-19 and how the conditions of the jail, and with the combination of the conditions of the jail and the COVID, it's basically like a death sentence for our clients. We've been filing motions for compassionate release for clients, and I know that they've released some folks, they've reduced the numbers, but there's still folks that are in the prisons in Michigan that have died. There's still folks that are in the jails that are at risk. There's in Wayne County Jail, they had 2 doctors that died. They had a couple of the sheriffs, deputy sheriffs, or commander, and a deputy, and then they had one of the folks died upon release. And so and we've been talking about the conditions of the jails for the longest time, but often it would fall on deaf ears, because people would say, well, they got in trouble, they shouldn't have the best conditions. And even though like you said, it's people have a right to dignity. Just because they're accused, they're innocent until proven guilty, and even if they are guilty, that doesn't mean that they have a right to dignity, clean, sanitary living conditions. And now, what if they don't have them? It not only will it affect them and their health, it'll affect the deputies, it could affect the lawyers, the prosecutors, and ultimately the judges who are evaluating the cases. So, I know we've talked before about expungement, and you've had some work, you've done some work as far as there's pending legislation here in Michigan. And so why don't you tell the voters some of the work, some of the work that you've done as far as expungement, and what your position is, and on expungement reform.
Yeah, so as you mentioned earlier, Robyn, my current day job is as senior legal counsel at the City of Detroit, and in that capacity, I lead our criminal justice reform work. And what we've seen, and you know this, Robyn, as somebody that works in Wayne County, that the lasting stigma of a criminal conviction is something that's holding so many people back from getting jobs, from getting housing, from continuing their education. And it could be, one youthful mistake that somebody made, and it stays with them for years, decades, and prevents them from doing what they want to do with their life, prevents them from getting a fresh start. There was a man that I met, and because of a 30-year-old conviction, he's worked his life in the auto assembly lines, but he wants to be a nurse. What he really wants to do is be a nurse and to help people and to go to nursing school. But because of an old 30-year-old conviction, he's not able to do that. And so we've been doing a few things in the City of Detroit. One is we've got our Clean Slate program, in which we actually have lawyers in the law department who are dedicated to helping people expunge these old criminal records under current law. And I've worked to help streamline that process. And it's free of charge, which is important, because often it can take $2,000 or more for an attorney to file the paperwork to expunge old criminal records. So that's something we've been doing that's been tremendously impactful for the lives of people in Detroit. The other thing and you mentioned this legislation, I've been proud to be working on that legislation alongside a bipartisan group of legislators up in Lansing for the last year now. And what Michigan law currently provides is, it allows for expungement, but only for a certain category of crimes, and you can't have very many of them. right? It's one felony or two misdemeanors. Otherwise, once you pass that threshold, your record is ineligible for expungement, and
Right.
that holds a lot of people back, in large part because sometimes it's very easy to get a bunch of charges because of a single incident. You get in a fight at a bar when you're 19 years old. The officer, you're drunk. The officers come and arrest you. You struggle a little bit, so now you've got a resisting and obstructing charge on top of that. I mean, a single incident can yield often seven charges, right? And it just it was one bad night when you were young, but it can stay with you for forever. So the legislation, and I'll be candid, I think it can go further. But the legislation that is going to be getting through, it passed the Senate a couple weeks ago, passed the House before that, and is going to be on to the governor's desk after conference committee, and I know the governor is supportive of it. So we will see this change in Michigan, but it's going to both expand the number of convictions that you can have on your record to be eligible for expungement. There's a one bad night provision in the bill, which counts all sort of the example that I just described counts all sort of incidents stemming out of charges stemming out of a single incident as one, which is very important. And fundamentally, this is going to not just render hundreds of thousands of Michiganders eligible for a clean slate and a fresh start, but this is just the right thing to do. And by the way, is going to be protective of public safety, because the data shows, and these are real numbers. If you are convicted of a felony, right? A felony, which is a serious offense.
Right.
And you stay out of trouble for 3 years, you are statistically less likely to commit a new crime than a randomly drawn member of the U.S. population.
Right.
So with these people, these folks, that are eligible, that could have been eligible for expungement, we're talking about people that have stayed out of trouble, that have done everything right, everything that the system has asked them to do, but it's still holding them back. And, at the end of the day, the best way to ensure people don't commit crimes is to give them access to work and give them access to housing.
Right.
And those are precisely the two things that a criminal record prevents you from doing. So it's counterproductive. And I'm looking forward to this legislation being passed and really having a fairer system here in Michigan.
Yeah, I think it's a good start. As you know, I do workshops on expungements, and we recently, it was starting in this last summer, we partnered up with State Rep Isaac, the late State Rep Isaac Robinson, and we had State Rep Sherry Gay Dignogos, State Rep Sherry, State Rep Tanisha Yancey, and we would do workshops. We went further than we would normally go. Like Judge Thomas, we call her the expungement queen. She has been doing for years expungement workshops, educating the public, bringing us lawyers in to help facilitate on how to clear up their records. We give them copies of the applications. We go through the process. We explain how they can do it, even if they can't afford a lawyer. And then for those who can afford a lawyer for a reduced rate, we work on those situations. But what I would say is the frustration. I'm calling State Senator Jeff Irwin. I've been talking to him about what's going on with the legislation. Where are we at? Because I have people, especially from the inner cities, who they don't have one felony. They've got 3 felonies, and they deliver, manufacture marijuana or cocaine, and then they legalized marijuana. And then other states, they did automatically, they wipe people's records clean. But for Michigan, I don't know, for some reason, things are just slower here as far as progress. So yeah, I do think I've seen the legislation. I think it's a good start. I think we could go further because, again, I've got folks calling me right now. I literally have people calling me Ms. McCoy, what's going on with the legislation? We want our records cleared. And then even for those folks that I have that do qualify, I like the idea of the automatic expungement, because some people are so depressed. It's hard. It's like you almost literally have to pick them up and take them to get their fingerprinting, hold their hand the whole way, which I can do, but it would be better if it's automatic. So we don't have to. It can just happen. They can just have their record clean, and they can get a new start, a new lease on life. I mean, I've talked to a number of people who have 2 or 3 felonies, and it's been 10, 20, 30 years, but they're not able to advance like they would want to in their career or their education or just in life. And just because you commit an offense doesn't mean it should be a life sentence. So I know we're pressed on time, so I have a couple more questions for you. First question I have, I know we talked about police reform, but one of the things that has come out of a lot of the protests and just people being upset about what happened with Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor. I have some artwork from one of our Gabe Lacey's son did some artwork with Breonna Taylor, and then Richard Brooks, and I will point out for Ahmaud Arbery he was a retired police officer, but so not an actual active officer. But what are your thoughts on the concept of defunding the police?
Yeah, it's a great question. Whenever you say defund, everybody's antennas go up, right? And they say, well, how can you justify defunding the police? And what I say in response to that is look, we've been defunding everything under the sun, especially here in Michigan, frankly, for decades. We've been defunding education. We've been defunding mental health. We've been defunding communities. We've been defunding housing. We've been defunding healthcare, right? And, we are paying for it at the back end through investment in not just our policing system, but our criminal system writ large. We spend in the state of Michigan $2 billion a year just on corrections. That's 1/5 of Michigan's general fund budget. Just on prisons. That's not counting police. That's not counting the cost of the county jails, which are another $500 million. We are spending a tremendous amount of money criminalizing people and locking people up. Now, we could be spending that money instead at the front end. And if you look at, for example, the relationship between third grade reading levels and likelihood of future incarceration, or the relationship between high school graduation rates and the likelihood of future incarceration, they're very pronounced. So if we invest in people early, if we invest in education, if we invest in community, if we invest in mental health interventions, if we invest in housing, we're not going to be paying for a criminal justice system on the back end that is so expensive, right? And so I don't think it's such a radical proposition.
Well, I guess the question what I have for you is, again, I do workshops on what to do when stopped by the police. I often partner with the police. I have friends that are officers. I think most police are good, but obviously there are bad apples out there. We've seen that. That's what necessitates me having to do the workshops with the children and the adults because there are some bad apples. When you go to urban environments like Detroit, I mean, in this situation, you're in Washtenaw County. You have in certain parts of Washtenaw County, where there's crime that occurs and that people want the police to come. Like, I know I've had situations where they're like, well, the police didn't come, and I often see where the police are overworked, underpaid. So when we say defund the police, I have to say, well, like, what exactly are we talking about? I see that there's a need to reprogram, retrain, recondition, demilitarize the police, but I don't know. When we say defund, I'm like, it's like we have to qualify it. I know that they did defund. They call it defund, but in Camden, New Jersey, they actually did still have a police department. Right. They changed the way that the police interacted with people. They had them more as guardians. So what I'm asking you, we have our voters obviously that are watching, and we have people that are police officers in Ypsi, Ann Arbor, and the sheriff's department. What does that mean to you as a candidate for prosecutor? What does that look like for, because again, the people are watching. They're maybe worried about their jobs, police officers. What does defund the police? What does that mean to you? What does it look like?
Yeah, and look, I agree. It's a very broad term. It's a very and it means a lot of different things to different people. What I was getting at is, number one, if we're looking more broadly from a societal perspective and how much money we're spending on jails and prisons and the criminal justice system's response to things, I think that if we invest in people at the front end, if we invest in education, if we invest in community, if we invest in housing, we are not going to have the need for that response at the back end. It's not a question of whether you pay for something, it's a question of when. And you can pay, say $9,000 a year for a child for a pre-K seat, or you can spend $40,000 a year locking somebody up at the back end, and the relationship between education in particular and likelihood of future involvement in the justice system is really profound. But that said, I am not a police abolitionist. I do think that police need to respond to public safety threats and concerns, and I wouldn't support anything that would either make their response less protective of public safety or just eliminate police entirely. I'll say that up front. I do think that there are points in how we are responding to things that, quite frankly, I think a lot of, and I work with police officers in Detroit, that a lot of police officers would be on board with. For example, we are asking police officers to be our frontline mental health responders, right? And every time there's a mental health crisis, police are called. Well, they're police officers, right? They're not trained mental health professionals. And it's not just putting the person who is dealing with a mental health crisis potentially in danger. It also, in a lot of cases, puts up the police officer's life in danger, right? Because they're not trained as mental health crisis interventionists, right? And you see police being called to the same folks over and over and over again who are dealing with acute mental health issues, because that's the only thing that we haven't cut back funding for, while we've cut back funding for our mental health services in this state, dating back to the 1990s when John Engler did it, right? And so we're asking
clients right now, they're stuck in the jail because I've had some situations where we're able to get them out and family will take them and they'll get therapy and support. But I have some folks stuck right now in the jail because the family's too afraid to take them, and we're waiting for them to be evaluated. But they really need to be in a mental health facility. Some of them need to be somewhere short term. Some of them need to be there long term. But we really, I see it on a regular basis. There are people that need to be in mental health facilities. There are people that need to be in drug rehab facilities. The jail is not the place for them. So right. And when we ask the police and jails,
to respond to this over and over and over again, and we're cycling people in and out, the crisis often worsens, right? And it's putting everybody's safety at risk. So that's something that I think we can build bridges here, and I think there's a lot of even law enforcement officers that would agree with this, because fundamentally, you don't want to be dealing with the same person dealing with a mental health or addiction crisis over and over again. But it's because we have failed systemically to provide that rehabilitation and treatment and support for people that, we keep relying on police and then ultimately jails as our first line of response to that.
Okay. And then I have one final question. So, and I looked on the Facebook, I didn't see any other questions from the public. So, at this, I'm sure we'll get some later on, but and I can follow up with you. So one final question. So if you win the election and then, so it's after August 4th and all the ballots are counted, you win, and then what, you would take office in January?
January 2021, yeah.
Okay. So what are the first steps that you would do if you were, if you prevail? What are the first things you would do once you get in there?
The very first thing I'm doing, and this is happening at 12:01 on January 1st, 2021. We are getting rid of the zero tolerance policies that this prosecutor's office currently maintains. They make great bumper sticker slogans if you're running a tough on crime office and you're running for re-election on that platform, but they undermine the ability of the prosecutor's office to respond to the individualized human story that is at the center of each and every case. And in many cases, they undermine public safety. And I'll just give you an example that you hear all these stories when you're out on the campaign trail, and this is just one that's stuck with me. There was a woman who was transitioning, and she was dealing with depression. And her one day she told her partner, I'm going to end it. I'm going to kill myself.
Okay.
And she took a gun and she drove to a nearby park, which was in a school zone. And her partner called the police, right? Because she was trying to save her partner's life, right?
Right.
And the police came, and because she was in a sort of gun-free school zone, she was arrested because she had the gun. Now this gets referred to the prosecutor's office. The prosecutor's office decides to charge her
Okay.
Because they've got this zero tolerance policy relating to gun crimes. Think about this. What message does that send to the next person who's got a loved one that's in crisis?
Right.
Right? A loved one who may be thinking about taking their own life. How does that build the support and the confidence that when you call, somebody is going to treat your loved one compassionately, right? That you're going to get help, rather than you're just going to be cycled into the criminal justice system and treated like a criminal. It sends exactly the wrong message. And anybody hearing that story, I would hope, would say criminal charges aren't appropriate in that circumstance. That was somebody that, the police were called, not because of a crime that was ongoing, but because, they needed help. We're trying to prevent a person from taking their own lives.
Right.
We cannot be taking these one-size-fits-all approaches and just checking boxes and say, well, it's a gun crime, and so it must yield criminal charges. That renders inoperative our ability as lawyers and as human beings to take stock of the story at the center of each and every case. So the very first thing I'm doing, those policies that this current prosecutor's office maintains, 12:01 p.m., gone when I'm prosecutor.
Right. I would say I'm glad to hear you say that. I've been practicing for 18 years. I'm from Ann Arbor. I started practicing in Washtenaw County, and then recently I've been more so in Wayne County, but I still have cases in Washtenaw. And you look at the Tri-County area, Wayne, Washtenaw, Oakland. Oakland is probably the most conservative. Then there's Washtenaw. Then Wayne is more progressive. Some people say Wayne is more progressive because it's bigger, or just the tone. But Washtenaw, being somebody like you, I was born and raised in Ann Arbor, and Ann Arbor, we have this mindset that it's very progressive, or I know it's not just Ann Arbor, it's Washtenaw County, but Ann Arbor, Ypsilanti, Dexter, Saline. But we have this mindset. We have the University of Michigan. You and I both went to the law school.
Go Blue.
And yeah, go Blue. And we have this mindset that Ann Arbor is kind of a calmer, laid back environment. But then when you go to the prosecutor's office, you don't always see that you've had folks that are children that were prosecuted involving a sports activity. They didn't charge the coaches. You had Ora Rosser, a Black woman, again, like you just said, she was in crisis and the family called the police and they deemed it justifiable homicide. And I believe in my heart, if it had been a white woman in the same situation, you wouldn't have had the same result. And that troubles me. And then just generally, there is a rigidity when you're dealing with the prosecutor's office. There's times I've had no choice but to go to trial because they don't, like when you talked earlier too about charging, like with people with expungement. A lot of times, it's not like what I thought it would be, because it's like they'll stack the charges. I don't go to trial as often because they'll stack the charges, and I'm willing to go to trial, but there are clients that get scared because there's so many charges and they'll take a deal. And so they're manipulated. And then even what I've seen in Washtenaw, they'll stack it. They'll give them two felonies, knowing that they won't be eligible for expungement. And so there's definitely a certain level of rigidity. I'm not going to say it's all the prosecutors in the current prosecutor's office, but there's definitely a general sense of rigidity in that office that I don't, it's not as compassionate as it can be. And I'm not saying that you just let out everybody that commits an offense and you let people get away with things when they commit wrong. I mean, I had a mama, Nurse Pam, who's out there. Nurse Pam would regulate me. She was in the military. You would get some consequences when there was some stuff that went down. Nurse Pam would make sure she would handle it, okay? But at the same time, she would be kind and loving and have redemption. In her heart, she would forgive. So it's like, we need that. We need a kinder, gentler prosecutor's office than what we currently have. And, I know you have this race and we have other races going on too. And I would say, I want to see change now. I know there's a race and there's, you got till January. I would like to see change now happening and efforts being made right now with the prosecutor's office to have a change of heart with the way that they're doing things, because these are human beings and they're affected. And so, Ellie, I want to thank you for your time, and I want to ask you, so if somebody is listening now and they want to be involved with your campaign, I know you've only got a few more weeks. How can they reach you?
Yep. So I'll get my email address first and foremost. If you want to reach out to me personally, got any questions or want to get involved, eli@eli2020.com. My website's eli2020.com. You can sign up to volunteer, talk to voters, get a yard sign, obviously donate to the campaign if if you're so inclined to do so. But to all the voters out there, we are committed to having conversations about these issues with everybody. And so if there's something you have a question about, something you'd like to talk to me about, reach out and email me. Would love to set up a phone call and talk through how we can build a justice system here in Washtenaw that Robyn, as you say, more reflects, I think, the community that we aspire to be and reflects our community's values and that we can ultimately be proud of.
Okay, well, thank you, Ellie, and good luck to you. And you have a blessed day, okay?
Thank you.
All right.
Appreciate it.
Okay.
Take care.
You too.